why aren't music pieces in games reaching the lengths of movie soundtracks or symphonies? I know what you're thinking, it's because it wouldn't be heard for long at all. By the time you finish that level, cutscene or whatever, the next piece is probably ready to play. So what's my thesis for this then? Game composers sometimes intentionally make music short to insinuate familiarity and iconic status. Let's try and prove this thesis with some examples. My first example is seen in Epic Mickey. Most areas in the game feature a different version of one piece for every moral path offered in the game, which means we have 3 versions of the same piece. In an attempt for the player to remember all of these versions, the hero, dark, and neutral pieces had each 1 or 2 instruments dedicated to each side. Also, going along with the plan, to make these memorable, they are rather short pieces. Fun fact, you'll hear almost half of Mean Street's theme by walking the width of the area. The composers behind Epic Mickey definitely displayed an understanding of how to make pieces memorable, and I'd argue very well. Another good example of this is in Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. Early on in the game, Professor Herschel Layton and Luke Triton investigate to find the book, The Grand Grimoire, a book detailing every magical spell in the world of Labyrinthia. They were informed that it was sealed inside a back room in the Great Archive, a grand library watched over by a woman named Riddell. Upon entering the library, a rendition of The Town's Past plays. This is the original rendition. The original piece was used to convey the interesting history behind some of the most important areas in Layton history, usually with tragic tales or a dangerous curiosity to it. However, the Great Archives version is of warmth and a relaxed pace. A smooth and slow melody that takes its time to finish. As you'd expect, it's actually still a really short track. But why? Well, it's another example of taking advantage of iconic status and repetition. Every time you walked into that library, Capcom in Level 5 wanted you to remember da 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 do do do, and so on. But is it worth the feeling of familiarity to make a shorter piece? Why not flesh out how beautiful and warm sounding this rendition of The Town's Past is? Well, I can assure you that the composers want you to remember their pieces. A common misconception is that memorability simply comes from prevalent melodies, but that's not always true. Just take a look at Metroid Prime soundtrack. A lot of the pieces, such as the theme of the Chozo Ruins, use only atmospheric sounds, yet I can still play it in my head. 8-bit and 16-bit pieces benefit from this especially, due to their limitations in music length to begin with. So let's bring this back to film and classical music. If this method of obtaining memorability of music works so well, why don't movie composers act on this? Well, that poses us another question, but to be honest, I think the only reason no other type of composer has caught on to this is because it simply doesn't fit with the style they're going for. And how about classical music? Often composers would simply repeat the entire piece once or sometimes twice. Is that lazy? I'll leave that up to you. But clearly we've seen some very creative composers in the video game market. Now, there's still one more lingering question to all of this. What do video game composers do in order to make sure their pieces don't become stale? Even with all of the clever benefits, short pieces can feel repetitive and tired. I won't deny that some games start to fail here, but others still continue to thrive. For one thing, there's instrumentation, and another, there's tone. If a composer were to say, offer you a tone and use instrumentation in a piece that cannot be found somewhere else in the soundtrack, it would become harder for that piece to feel repetitive. This may be confusing, so let me try and use an example. Sonic Lost World is literally a walking textbook example of this. Take pieces such as Careening Cavern and Midnight Owl. One of these is an atmospheric piece with little melody. The other is a piece mixing romantic era music with contemporary composition. You will not find pieces similar in tone and instrumentation to these in the rest of the soundtrack. Especially looking at Careening Cavern, you'll just see how repetitive it is already. So how come I and others aren't saying, this piece is boring? The only way I see to explain this is because it's original sounding in its own soundtrack. Now before I go, are there any real downsides to making music pieces in gaming short? I think lost potential in fleshing out themes would be the biggest one. Well, now you know why music pieces in gaming are short. Once it was because of limitations, but now it's a smart practice used by mostly gaming composers. I'm Innocent Christoph Gavin, and I'll see you around.